Alright guys, happy Wednesday. This week things get a little interesting because not only do we continue to talk about my experience, but what this looks like from an outside perspective, also potentially involving other students. So the deeper I got into this situation, the more I realized that this conversation was becoming bigger than just me. So at first, when I started investigating, I thought this was simply maybe a dispute over one student's education, one student's outcome. But after researching public records, litigation involving for-profit schools specifically, nursing regulations, and graduation statistics, also including student complaints, I started asking broader questions. How these systems work and who they impact the most. So what initially felt personal slowly started to feel systemic as well. And before I continue, I just want to be very clear that this video reflects my observation, personal experience, investigative research, publicly available information, legal research, and broader public policy concerns surrounding nursing education and exit exam practices. I'm discussing questions and concerns and relaying to you my thought process by these documents I found, regulations, litigations, and records that I've personally reviewed and interpreted on my own. The bigger questions I have is, when I immediately started researching, what stood out to me the most is how often litigation involving these for-profit nursing schools discuss the idea of vulnerable communities being heavily targeted by expensive educational programs. As I began to research even further, I came across discussions surrounding concepts like reverse redlining, where critics argue that certain institutions may disproportionately market high-cost educational programs to the lower income or minority communities, while students take on substantial debt in hopes of entering stable professions, but half, maybe even most, aren't even going to make it out of the school, and they'll end up with essentially nothing like me. No conferred degree on paper. Critics describe this practice where institutions may target specific minority or low-income communities with high cost and low-quality products that they know consumers will struggle to pay back or won't even make it out. And they may even know this from the beginning. And welcome back to the Nursing Investigation. So I thought about my own experience at Jersey College of Nursing in Ewing. Somebody also pointed out to me that this school specifically is part of a strip mall. If you look on the maps here, you can see exactly what I mean. It's on the border of Trenton, which could be considered a high poverty area or an area of lower income. Critics also argue the graduation versus licensure disparity, which felt relatable as well. The gap between high NCLEX pass rates and low graduation rates is a common point of contention in for-profit education litigation. A school may boast that they have a 98% pass rate, hypothetically speaking, like to lure students, right? But if only, let's say, 30% of those students graduate, it can be argued that it could be seen as filtering out students to protect their accreditation. If you were told the program was easy to complete as you were entering the program, or they had a high success rate without being informed of the low graduation rate itself, comparing those two numbers, the girls that made it through the program, the nursing students in general that made it through the program, versus the amount of students that were actually allowed to take their NCLEX per the school, per their policy, This could be considered misleading. And in New Jersey specifically, I talk about New Jersey because that's where my case stands, and that's what I try to relate to. I look at the critics' arguments, I look at my investigative research, and I'm like, does this feel similar? The appellate division has ruled that for-profit schools are not exempt from being sued for misrepresenting like job prospects or educational quality. So although a for-profit institution can invent or create their own policy, they cannot override state, federal rules, regulations, law, or go above, consumer laws, etc. For example, the Consumer Fraud Act, right? Everybody has to follow it, whether you're a for-profit school or not. So, for example, if one could be seen as misrepresenting the time and cost it takes to become a nurse, that could be considered, unclear standards, or have inconsistent terminology, withholding scores, unclear remediation pathways, post-completion barriers, transcript or conferral disputes, or students completing their coursework but being blocked from licensure access. So I ask myself, does this apply to me? So I investigated further. I was like, are there any reported patterns of misconduct? And I've actually found there are documented student complaints that are in similar positions to me. Even at the Ewing campus, there has been litigation for multiple reasons. It may, I think, mirror theories used in other lawsuits against for-profit colleges. So not everybody who's started a lawsuit against their nursing education has come from Jersey College. It has happened at other locations as well. This is becoming a systemic issue across the United States. So withholding grades, for example, students have alleged that they were failed on final exams up to 5 times without being allowed to see their actual score, effectively preventing them from becoming licensed nurses after spending nearly $30,000. I was like, okay, this is getting a little more relatable than I anticipated. So what started raising more questions for me is, how did they get 5 chances? And then how do we go down to 4? And then how do girls who get certain scores only need 2? So when you sit here and you think about it, oh, you failed if you didn't meet the benchmark. Well, why do I have to meet the benchmark somebody else didn't have to meet? Well, why did somebody else get more chances? Well, why do I have to retake the entire program and somebody else doesn't? Where is the consistency, and how can you say I'm not ready if you're not even keeping that baseline consistent for everyone? Those are questions I just ask. So I think this connects conversations connected to much larger public policy concerns involving that student debt, involving those who may end up back on welfare, who then face these licensure barriers that can't get a better job. And ultimately, these graduation outcomes that entirely affect the school positively, but the student negatively. I also started researching the difference between graduation rates and those NCLEX pass rates. I thought that was so interesting. Because on paper, a school may advertise an extremely high NCLEX pass rate, but critics for profit education models have argued that if significantly fewer students actually make it to the point of taking the NCLEX, I think that raises important questions about how these statistics are being achieved. Then, for my specific situation, we have that NJAC 1337-121, which explicitly adopted to end those abusive exit examination practices, or at least put out the board's perspective and the board's regulation and their stance on this ever even happening from my interpretation. Performance on these exit exams are irrelevant. That's what I gathered from this regulation. That's my observation. A nursing program may require a comprehensive exam to assess one's knowledge, but your score shall not affect your ability to graduate or prevent you from taking your licensing examinations. And this is why I think that is, because once you've completed your nursing education, you've done everything within the program curriculum. You've done your hours program, right? You've done everything the accreditation, the board requires you to do. You don't need this exit examination because, to me, in my observation, it's not for you anyway. It has nothing to do with getting your license. It is for the school's accreditation. And when I actually went back to look at New Jersey Consumer Affairs, specifically the conversation with the Board of Nursing, the public, etc., on why schools are doing this, they explicitly stated themselves that it's used for accreditation, not for student competency. That is what the NCLEX is for. The NCLEX is to determine competency. And if you take that away from the state, how much power are you really giving schools? Are they overstepping? And then we get into, the continuous violation doctrine. Something I found that, for example, if a factory was legally allowed to dump chemicals in a river, but a law passed saying no more dumping years later, the factory can't say, well, we started this project back in the 1900s, so we get to keep poisoning the water forever. Every day I feel like it is my observation and interpretation that the school refuses to send my name to the Board of Nursing. I feel like it's a continuous act of refusal every day that resets. I don't think the law cares when it started. I think it cares that they are currently using a prohibited exam to block a qualified person from licensure. Now, this isn't to say somebody from 50 years ago can just wake up one day and say, you know what, this happened to me and I think I'm going to come back for it. There are such things called statutes of limitations, which I am fully within. The school may want to frame this past event from 2019 to view the consequences and administrative status as continuing to the present. I mean, we are currently arguing the same underlying factors in present time though. This is my thought process. So then I get into civil rights and vested rights. Do you guys know anything about the Brown versus Board of Education? There was a landmark case in 1954. The Supreme Court decision ruled, Brown versus Board of Education, that the court unanimously ruled racial segregation in public schools were unconstitutional. And this, to me, is why you always fight, even though there were rules. Because I don't think rules can be right or wrong, but I think they deserve to be tested for the fairness and equality and justice of everybody. So, when a court or board says a practice is arbitrary, or I always have a hard time saying this word, capricious, I'll spell it out, and abusive, they are saying the practice was always fundamentally unfair. So I don't think when this rule came out in 2022, but the conversation was being had in 2020, I don't think it was a new idea. It was evolving over time. It was just the Board of Nursing stepping in on paper because it was happening so much that they literally had to make a regulation for it. That it is my interpretation, they never agreed to it to the beginning. And if the Board of Nursing comes out and says, oh, we did agree with this practice, I will clarify that. But I have not found that yet. I have not found that rebuttal. And to me, it looks like a predatory business model. That's my interpretation and understanding and observation. If you've met the clinical and clock hour requirements, you have vested the right to your credentials. That is my belief. I don't think a school can use a calendar date to strip you from a legal protection. What about the transcript integrity? Since this exam is not on my transcript, it is not a part of the accredited curriculum that I contracted to complete. How is something in the shadows preventing my graduation? How can my degree be conferred over something that isn't even on my transcript? I'm probably going to have to ask FERPA about that. The fact that the exit exam is missing from my transcript, yet being used to withdraw me after I had completed said nursing education, I think is critical. In a legal sense, maybe I wonder, is the school saying that my degree doesn't exist on paper, but I'm saying the degree exists, but they just won't confer it on paper? What does that mean? Are we hiding my degree? Like, what do you call that? If the degree exists, but it's not on paper because of, let's say, a technicality or an administrative duty that is yet to be complete because of a policy from what I believe is the school's perspective, what does that mean? Is that possible? If you completed all your clinicals, clock hours, the hours program, the curriculum that is accredited, what does that mean to mark you withdrawn after that? You don't owe any money. You didn't have a criminal record. Is it a factual inaccuracy? Are they allowed to do that? So when you say schools can set their own policies and create their handbook, can they override FERPA and federal or state laws, or even the State Board of Nursing that gives them their accreditation? And to be clear, I'm not making accusations here. I'm truly explaining the concerns and debates that already exist publicly surrounding exit exams, graduation filtering, accreditation pressures within the nursing education. The more I researched, the more I saw reoccurring arguments just like this that haven't even been made from me, that have been brought to my attention. Some schools may heavily rely on a benchmark or predictive testing to predict pass rate metrics tied to accreditation to protect their reputation, and furthermore, not only keep their state board of nursing accreditation, but what about ASIN? When it comes to my experience and why it specifically raised questions in my own situation, one thing that confused me was how the exit exam did not appear as a credit-bearing course on my transcript, but could still allegedly determine whether I was considered ready to be a practicing nurse, essentially, or that my education was complete or it should be withdrawn. That led me into researching what some critics refer to as shadow requirements, meaning requirements that may significantly affect a student's future, even though they are not clearly reflected within the actual academic curriculum or transcript. So would it be okay for a student to go into nursing school and at the beginning say, this is what you need to accomplish, and then somewhere between the beginning, middle, and end, not your first day, not the day of signing the contract, somewhere within your time there, you've already enrolled, somebody says, hey, well, now you need to do XYZ. Is that okay? Is it okay to add a barrier to your licensure after you have already completed the program that isn't even part of the curriculum? From my perspective, that continued raising more and larger questions. If everything is complete on my transcript, what exactly was the withdrawal referring to? What exactly am I being withdrew from? Because at this point, I have everything. I'm being withdrawn from what? Just getting my license. Let me clarify. Just sitting to take my NCLEX to get my license. Can you withdraw me from that process for no other reason but, let's say, hypothetically speaking, accreditation reasons based on what the board has said about this New Jersey regulation they created stopping the exit exams? So when I came across this regulation, which discussed the comprehensive examinations, I read those regulations and public discussions surrounding them. I started questioning more. How do schools determine the line between a benchmark exam, a graduation requirement, and a licensure barrier? Because from my perspective, there is a major difference between using the exam as an educational tool versus using it in a way that ultimately prevents a student from progressing towards licensure. So hold on. From my observation, you have somebody pay in full before they can take this exit examination. So their tuition is paid off. There's no misconduct. They do their financial aid exit counseling. They sign up to get their diploma. They start looking for job opportunities. Everything is complete. They have a whole checklist because they're done with school, right? That's how I see it. And then you have them take this exit examination for what? So you're having students complete their nursing education, be done. Because once you do your financial aid exit counseling, you're done. Just to take an examination that will prevent them from taking their license, because if the exit examination didn't exist at this point, I would be taking my NCLEX. It could only be used to prevent one from taking it, because I'm already qualified with passing it or without it. I'm already qualified. So what is the point of putting my education on the line to take it? The financial reality comes into play harshly. When I talk about that financial aid exit counseling, why does it say I graduated? Why immediately when it was done and I immediately finished the program, give or take, why did it say I was graduated? Why was I treated like a graduate financially, but I was held to standards of a student that withdrew from some sort of academics on paper? All because of an exit exam. Remember, my nursing education is equal to those of practicing nurses. This isn't about academic deference. This isn't about completing a nursing curriculum. I didn't fail a course. I didn't fail a final. Nothing like that. I have no record. This solely comes down to an exit exam that was not part of the clock-houred program, that was not part of the transcript, has nothing to do with academics of any kind. I want to be clear. An exit exam is also not NCLEX. An exit exam was used after I completed my nursing education to only prevent me from taking my NCLEX if the school felt possibly I wasn't going to pass on the first try. That is my understanding. So when I go back to that financial reality, who are the people most vulnerable in these situations? They're often students that have already invested years of their lives, thousands of dollars in tuition, financial aid, loans, transportation, childcare, adjustment of employment, and countless unpaid clinical hours. Many students entering nursing programs are trying to escape the financial instability. Some are single parents. Some are first-generation college students. Some are already living paycheck to paycheck while trying to complete demanding healthcare programs. And once someone has already invested that much into their career path, walking away no longer feels like a practical or realistic option. That's why it kind of like makes these situations feel emotionally, financially, and professionally devastating for many students. Like, it's just crazy to me. It brings me to even broader concerns about public policy. The more I research, the more I realize this conversation also connects to public policy concerns. Questions involving nursing shortages, the healthcare staffing, questions involving transparency in higher education. What are we really training our new grad nurses to do? Take a test or be clinically ready? And one thing I repeatedly saw through public discussions, litigations, and regulatory debates was a concern over whether schools should have the power to prevent students from reaching licensure after completing their education. So, what other profession do you know that a grad is required to take their licensure exam more than once? Good pause. Take a breath. This works me up so much. Unless, of course, you fail, you don't meet the benchmark, and you'll take it again. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about schools now imposing their own, what could be seen as a mimic to a licensure exam. So ultimately, how many times do you have to take it? And now I'm hearing exit exams are being put into courses. So you're taking how many exit exams that mimic the NCLEX that could be seen as similar to the NCLEX from certain schools' standpoints? How many times do you need to take the licensure exam before you actually sit for the real one and can get your license? And what other profession does that? Because unlike traditional public universities, critics of these for-profit educational systems often argue that some institutions operate under business pressure that may influence how graduation outcomes, pass rates, or student progressions are handled. And I'm not stating conclusions here. I'm explaining the broader conversations and concerns that lead me to deeper research into these issues, because I understand the pressure on the school side to keep their school afloat and accredited. But I don't think making it the student's responsibility is where the story ends. How is that fair? The school never loses in any sense. Discovery and record concerns. Another thing that stood out to me personally, the discovery and record concerns is another thing that stood out to me personally. As I researched the nursing regulations and educational record-keeping requirements, I started asking questions about how administrative statuses are determined and how transcripts actually reflect those completions. Because traditionally, the term withdrawal usually suggests a student stopped attending or voluntarily left a course before completion. So from my perspective, seeing that everything was complete, I feel like this raises questions that deserve clarification. Again, researching more deeply, transcript integrity, record-keeping regulations, FERPA rights, the broader issue as to whether certain administrative classifications accurately reflect what actually occurred academically. So when you're looking at my transcript, that degree withdrawn does not accurately reflect what is presented on the transcript. Everything is complete on the transcript. So now you're telling me schools can just say, hey, we have this over here in the corner you have to do to get that degree. It's almost like dangling a carrot in front of your face. Can they do that? Well, that's why we're in litigation and potentially facing arbitration. Right now, my case is being heard. I've already gone through 2 judges, the trial court. My case has merit to be heard. The issue was raised from the school's perspective is now they want me in arbitration. And I don't agree with arbitration for a situation like this for many reasons. Here's just one.
Public. And that is the perfect sentencing, by the way, for a narcissist who thinks that power and money is what wins the game. Like, I just have the connections. It is reminiscent of, I feel like, the harassment that I have gone through privately with the Daily Wire throughout the court system, that now I'm actually kind of happy some of this is spilling into public, because it matters for the public to see it. It matters. This is why arbitration court, I think, should be illegal. I think it should be illegal. It allows abuses to take place that would not otherwise take place were things happening in the public.
So two things can happen here in the appellate division. The appellate court can come back and say she can stay in the judicial system. She can stay in trial court. It will be heard by a judge or a jury, etc. That unfolds later. But she'll be in the court where there's public view and transparency. Or I should say more transparency. When you go to arbitration, it's more so you're in a room with one judge, they make a decision, and that is what it is. And I'm not sure if I quite agree with that. So if the cards fell that way, I could always appeal it and send it to the Supreme Court. So at this point, I'm unsure what I will do until I know the outcome, because to me, this is bigger than me. And I don't know what I want to do with that. So, one issue that repeatedly appeared to even get us here was the legal research involved whether a party can waive arbitration rights by substantially participating in litigation first. Can you go through litigation? Can you sue somebody? Can you go back and forth for years and one day say, yeah, you know what, I think I want to go to arbitration instead? From my understanding and the research I reviewed, courts may sometimes examine whether a party's conduct is consistent with an intent to arbitrate, or whether extensive litigation activity may prejudice the opposing side. That became relevant to me because litigation had already began, court proceedings, filings, hearings, motions, to me, significant legal activity before arbitration was ultimately raised as this is final. Again, I'm not deciding those legal questions myself. Those are issues that are currently being argued within the court system, and that's where we stand now. But as somebody experiencing the process firsthand, researching these doctrines and understanding what was actually going on helped me better understand the legal arguments being made. So, as of now, I'm speaking up publicly. One thing I want people to understand is that speaking publicly about my experience did not start from wanting attention. If I wanted attention, I would go about this a very different way. Even from the beginning, I've tried to handle this internally, quietly, wait for the Board of Nursing to make their move, wait for my school, in my opinion, to do the right thing, which I feel is to give me my degree and let us move on. Have a good day. It started because I genuinely could not understand how one could complete all those years and, in my experience, be misled thinking all of this meant nothing, and just to go to another school and they say, why do you want to do this work all over again? You're done. Why is there no degree on your transcript? You need to go back to that school. So imagine, to my surprise, how I felt in that moment. I go back there, they deny me, and then they sue me. And now we're in court for years. It just feels like something is being prolonged that wasn't my responsibility to take to begin with. That wasn't my delay. I feel like, in my observation, is now being used against me. The more the school delays, in my observation, the more they're putting it on my shoulders, as if I created this policy, as if I didn't do enough, as if I don't deserve it. That's what it feels like. I'll show you more on that later. Whether it's former students, current students, or people sharing similar frustration from other schools, fears, debt burdens, and confusion surrounding the progression testing and licensure barriers, the fact that it's a debate, I think, ultimately answers the question. Because if there was one right answer, this wouldn't be a debate at all. But the fact there's even a gray area for a profession like nursing and healthcare, something so serious, I think it deserves to be investigated. I don't think it proves automatic wrongdoing, but I think it deserves scrutiny. I think it deserves questions. But it did make me realize that these conversations were ultimately much larger than my individual situation. So what started about me, I don't feel like is going to end up about me. And if I have to go to politicians, I will. If I have to create a bill, I will. At the end of the day, this series is not about telling people what conclusions they should reach. I want to be prepared for anything and everything. I want the most equal, justice, fair option for everybody that is beneficial to get people out of the house, off welfare, in good paying careers, to take care of themselves, to help the quality of the healthcare system, to stop nursing shortages, to stop nurses from being overworked and underpaid. I want to increase the value of nursing, because this situation has taught me anything. It's why nurses always say they are underpaid and undervalued. Because if you can complete your entire nursing education and have education equivalent to those practicing nurses, and then, from my observation, the brief that I just received makes it seem like I don't deserve to be a nurse because of an exit exam that ultimately has nothing to do with me. Because it's only used for those accreditation purposes based on the board's words themselves. It just raises a lot of concerns for me. So now it goes to the appellate court. My case will be heard. It started in a lengthy litigation and will continue to do so. The fact that I've been in court for years now and we're still debating which forum I'm going to be heard in, or venue, whatever. This whole thing was over the contract. This whole thing is over federal laws, state laws, regulations. The board has made their position clear. The trial court, 2 judges, and they just haven't let me go. No one has ever fought for me so much like this, which is the sad part. The only time somebody has put this much effort and money into keeping me within their palms, it's a weird spot to be in. Because I almost wish, you don't have to be the bad guy. I just don't get it. A part of me is I wish this was a positive experience. You love me so much that you want to keep me forever, but at what point does it feel like abuse? This isn't a closing statement of conclusion. This is the thoughts I ask myself. At what point does that love, that safeguarding, that protection from the world, or from the world from me, me from the world, become abusive? That's what it feels like from somebody who's experienced abuse in many different forms. That is what the situation feels like to me. That is what it looks like to me. To close this week, let's go over some questions from the week. Tanner the Jack says, what do you do for a living after pouring all that time and money into a nursing degree but not becoming a nurse? Genuinely curious. There's no way to just repeat the areas needed to pass. That seems unfair because no program has a 100% graduation rate. Most programs do allow for credit transfer and gap years, but it sounds like nursing is the exception, ? Do programs have an entrance exam to disqualify students before they spend all of that? This is a great question. So let's start at the beginning. Exactly. What is there for me to do with all of these nursing credits but no degree conferred on the transcript? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I cannot be a nurse without that degree on my transcript from my understanding on this date. Secondly, I can continue to be a medical assistant. I can continue to be a home health aide. I can continue to be a nurse's assistant. I can continue being a receptionist. Patient care tech, maybe, but it's like I didn't need to do all of this. Nothing that I can do right now was needed that I couldn't do before without this. I didn't need to spend $30,000 to continue doing what I already was doing. What, I'm just going to continue with the same job title with a little more knowledge and work above my pay grade every day and can't be acknowledged for it? Do you know what that feels like? Do you know how shitty that feels? And I'm not talking to you. I'm just saying, like, in general. Like, that's how it feels. Like, so shitty. To just walk around and not be acknowledged for what you could be or what you truly are deep down. It seems unfair. No program has a 100% graduation pass rate. And I asked myself that too. Is a school so desperate to be number one that they want 100%? Because even if I saw that, I wouldn't believe it. I would rather go to a school with integrity, transparency, than a school that says, oh, we have a perfect NCLEX pass rate. No, you don't. Perfection does not exist. I would not believe that. I want to know the truth. I would rather go to a nursing program that had like a 50-50 NCLEX pass rate, or what's the lowest, like 75% or whatever it is. It can be the lowest. But no, I was allowed to take my NCLEX, and their numbers were real, and they treated their students with respect. Most programs do allow for credit transfer and gap years, but it sounds like nursing is the exception. So come to find out, when I go to potentially transfer my credits to other schools, that's not really possible for every nursing school out there. And I'll get into why later, but it has a lot to do with accreditation. They are accredited. Jersey College of Nursing, at the time I went to school for their LPN program, was accredited by the Board of Nursing. And I'm going to leave it at that for now. So when you're transferring credits, other schools don't have to accept your transferred credits. I like to see it on a case-by-case basis. It can be a blanket statement, but they do reserve the right to accept them or not. Like, first, if I wanted to go to a school for, if I wanted to go work at a hospital or something, or like do something with the VA, or like certain situations, my credits will not be accepted. I didn't know that at the time. Again, I'll get into this later, but transferring my credits would basically be like transferring my credits just to get a degree conferred. That is why I ran into a brick wall and thankfully talked to somebody who was so educated, smart, and cared and actually had integrity to not take my money and make me repeat something I already did, even if it brought me into this mess. Do the programs have an entrance exam to disqualify students before they spend all that? Actually, I took an entrance exam and I passed it. So yes, they actually do. So you're telling me, how does one make it into your school as a C student but can't leave a C student? Are we moving the benchmark at a later date? So you're telling me that C that was accepted all the way through nursing school isn't accepted now? How is that right? Shady Publicity says, it feels like at most you just need to redo something within the year, maybe take a testing class. Doing it all over again is wild. I agree too. People ask, oh, you can't keep repeating, this test? No, it is limited. And even if you repeat the test, they will give you different exams. So, for example, I could take HESI, and then I could take ATI, and then HESI again, and then NLN, and then they can give you their own made-up exit exam called the Jersey College exit exam, or maybe at one point girls were taking Kaplan, from my understanding. Like, how is that right? So even if you can retest, you're not guaranteed to take the same make or model. And I also didn't know that questions were thrown out. So all those questions, for example, I believe for my exams, it was 30 questions were thrown out and you didn't know which ones were going to be thrown out. How is that right? And also, I didn't know it was going to be timed. It's just like, it feels like you're putting me in such a high stakes stress environment to make sure I'll pass this NCLEX on my first day and not actually if I'm competent at all. So what am I actually going to do all over again when everything is complete? There's nothing for me to repeat. If you wanted me to keep taking this exit exam, I definitely would have, just to call it a day. Like, it's fine. But it's like, at this point, with all the trouble they caused me, I'm done. I'm done. There's nothing to repeat. Kate Pep says, I'm so glad I chose a school that didn't have an exit exam. We just graduated and were left to take the NCLEX or don't. Some people passed, some people didn't. The school has always kept their accreditation, and I think that says a lot. Clap Midwife says, passing the exit exam is part of the program requirements. You should be able to repeat the last semester. I think this is a big misunderstanding a lot of people have. The exit exam is not a part of a course. It is not a final exam. It is not required for nursing. It is not required within the curriculum. It is not a part of my transcript. It is not a part of the clock hours needed that was on my transcript. It is not a part of the program curriculum. Not a course, not a test, not a final, nothing. It's nothing. Literally nothing. I literally do not need it to be a nurse. If the school were to put degree conferred with the conferral date on my transcript, I could go take my NCLEX tomorrow. I don't need it. It's nothing. All it is for the school's metrics. And that's based off of the Board of Nursing stance and words. So, it's not a part of a semester. It wasn't a course. My education is done. So I don't need to repeat a semester because there's nothing to repeat. That's why you get stuck, I feel like, in this infinite loop at the end of redundancy that leads to nothing because there's nothing to repeat. There's nothing more for me to do. So ultimately, it leaves me with nothing. It's a black hole. It's an abyss of nothing. All right, guys, I will see you next Wednesday for our next episode. It's episode 20, so I'm going to make it special, I think. I don't know how yet, but I'll figure it out. I can't believe we've been on this journey for this long, and I'm not stopping anytime soon, if at all. I'll see you next week. Bye, guys.